Welcome viewers to this series of lectures on forests, development and sustainability. This is part 7 and 8 of this series of lectures around this theme that we would be talking about today. And over the earlier interactions that I had with you, we have run through the outline of the forest laws across 2 centuries, that is the 19th century, middle of the 19th century onwards down to the 20th century, passage from colonial period to independent India. And that's the idea. The idea is to run through all these forest and preservation laws in order to discern the fundamental forces shaping these laws and how the pressure of commercialization of timber resources or other forest resources, introduction of some technology in extractive and transportation sector, and introduction of the railways impacted and drew the contours of these policies. Although in the colonial period it was all ensconced in the vocabulary of sustainability and preservation and state intervention to take over forests in order to conserve it. But as you would have discovered by now, and that is what we will be taking forward in today's lectures too, is that there is a continuing thread of commercial constraints, commercial lures, within which these measures are undertaken. And also, if we analyze it this way, then there are quite a few remnants of the same running through independence. So even in the post-independent India, we find those structures of forest department and laws, etc., and the commercial lures operating the way they did earlier. Of course, the earlier context was that of colonialism, so it operated in the precincts of colonialism. And post-independence, it was the national thrust for industrialization and therefore making forest products or resources available to the companies, to the industries, undertaking this industrialization at a cheap cost by state subsidy and so forth. But that did take its toll on forests, and this is how the story runs. So, picking up from where we had left last time around, and let's go back to the times when the first Imperial Forest Department is being formed around 1864. And we had discussed that the traditional matrix of economic and social relationships operating as they were in a limited consumption precincts of localities and bazaars were ripped open in the altered benefit to cost ratio lure. And it was the colonial state working in the garb of taking measures towards forest conservation, which was facilitating this ownership change by emerging as the prime candidate for the same. So what is it that we are trying to say here? We are trying to say here that the assertion on part of the state, the colonial state at that point of time, around 1864, to have owned, to have asserted its ownership of forests is happening alongside the altered consumption pattern because of several technological changes in transportation and communication sector, having ripped open the consumption pattern from localities or from local consumption to global consumption. So it had become possible for the middlemen operating to use these forest products or forest resources for a market which is distant, for a market which is which is a new kind of consumption. For example, introduction of the railways is a new thing. Traditionally, timber or wood was not used for transportation and communication at this scale, but with the introduction of the railways, it is the railway sleepers that were made out of it, and it constituted a huge demand for good quality timber. And they were all supplied from Indian forests. So 1850s we get to see the introduction of the railways, and therefore there is a brazenness with which the timber is being used. The trees are being cut from various patches in different areas wherever railway lines are being laid in India. And the state intervenes. The optics created is that state is intervening and owning, asserting its ownership in order to conserve, in order to protect, in order to make conservation efforts for forests. But as we shall see, that the story continues unabated. Also true is the fact that we are talking the colonial times, and having devastated its own forests, we are talking of Britain, so having devastated its own forests and that of Ireland, South Africa and eastern littorals of the United States, to source timber for the burgeoning shipbuilding and iron smelting besides farming, forest destruction for Britain becomes almost proverbial of its political victory. So wherever Britain goes, from around this point of time, with the introduction of the railways, it takes a huge toll on forests. Why? Because railways have to be introduced for colonial purposes, for supplying raw material from mines to the port cities, from where it could be shipped back to England or other European markets, where finished products would be made out of it, and more and more value addition could be farmed out of it. So this story almost meant that if Britain is asserting its imperial control over an area, it has to take toll on colonial forests, on forests in the colonies. So it had almost become proverbial of its political victory. So that's the pun intended here. For the Royal Navy, the safety of the empire depended on its wooden walls, and this is something which comes from a record in the imperial period itself, 1922-27, Stebbings' book. And that tells you that how critical was the forest resources for the continuation of the British Empire and its maritime glory, and timber, good quality timber, was so central to them. Also, if you look at the colonial state in India across the 19th and 20th century, there is a lot of emphasis on augmenting revenue, and when we are talking of revenue augmentation in 19th and early 20th colonial situation, basically we are talking of tax on agricultural produce. Today, agricultural income is not taxed in independent India, so this logic will not apply to independent India, of course, but during the colonial period, a major chunk of revenue came from agriculture income, and therefore there was also this mindset, or this thing coming out of this policy of revenue augmentation, that forests, wherever they came in the middle of agricultural fields, then since agricultural fields are plowed and state gets to gain some revenue out of it, therefore forests are seen as some kind of an obstruction to agriculture, and the state thrust is to augment the area under agriculture, because that will yield them revenue, agricultural tax, right? So forests are seen that way, and hence the prospects of revenue maximization from agriculture also worked as some kind of a deterrence for enlarging the area of forests. In fact, it worked to the contrary. So that pressure, that revenue pressure, was always felt by the colonial administration, and that also to a great degree shaped the way colonial forest policies were made and stipulations or were even implemented. Introduction of the railways and deforestation, something that I just spoke to you about. Also, please remember that of the European industrialization amongst various countries, England, the sheer fact that England is the first to industrialize amongst the European countries, England is the only country which industrialized without using railways to a great extent, because at that point of time it was not invented and it had not operationalized in that fashion. But all other countries in Europe, be it in the second stage of industrialization or third stage of industrialization, we find that it is the railway that becomes the harbinger of industrialization in other parts of Europe. So with the industrialization of Europe impacting different areas of Europe, more and more areas of Europe, obviously, as we discussed earlier, that forest resources had almost been depleted, be it Ireland or even in South Africa and eastern littorals of America and so forth, because Britain is very much present there. And therefore, subsequently, as it gets introduced in India in the 1850s, it is bound to take its toll on Indian forests. So, if you technically see the identified species, and we are talking of tree species here, the identified species that were considered suitable for making railway sleepers, railway line sleepers, were only 6. But since there was no kind of organized way of doing this, and it were the middlemen who were supplying these timber for making of sleepers, etc. So there was indiscriminate felling of trees of various other species also. And this is what we understand as profligacy, right? So this is unwanted expenditure or damage to the forest resources that is being done, because there is no law, or there's no way it is organized and so forth. And these middlemen, these contractors are supplying as many wood or timber to the company, and the railways is finally picking up only the suitable variants, and the other wood that is made available by cutting trees is just not accepted, and so it goes waste. Right, but the forests have taken its toll. So all these things constituted the backdrop of the I would say making of the forest department, or emergence of the Imperial Forest Department. For example, from 1860, we have another reference. We are informed of a consignment where an overwhelming number of 458 sleepers were of unauthorized species out of a total of 487 that were supplied. So it's an overwhelming number. It's which works out to be almost 92%. So 92% of the timber supplied is of unauthorized species of trees, and therefore it goes waste. So it is not only the actual consumption. So if we are using figures in terms of its usage for railway sleepers, then it's not only that which is impacting Indian forests. 92% of the number is actually cut but not used. So in terms of the forests taking the toll, it's very much or very many times more than the actual consumption of railway sleepers in terms of timber. So it is in this backdrop that the first Imperial Forest Department is made, and the years following the formation of Imperial Forest Department saw several other forests taking the hit in terms of timber. For example, the Devdar-rich Satluj area and Yamuna valleys ended up supplying over 650,000 sleepers between 1869 and 1885, and that tells you about the enormity of demand generated by introduction of the railways. And in traditional terms, or in traditional life, in the absence of the railways, there is no such demand generated for timber from the forests, and this is what is happening at around this point of time. Now, the Forest Department that was set up under the leadership of that rich Brandes, who was a botanist of repute at Bonn University in Germany, and who had taken up the new assignment as first Inspector General of Forests in colonial India. So it is under the guidance of Brandes that this department is supposed to function in its initial decades. And in fact, the forest laws that come into being subsequently is a consequence of the debate that followed between various thinkers, academicians, even environmentalists, or we may not use the term environmentalists at this stage because of absence of that concentrated consciousness about forest preservation and so forth. Nevertheless, since England and greater part of Europe and also America had fairly industrialized, so people in Europe and America had come to know about the kind of toll that industrialization and introduction of railways takes on their forests, and so there is that sense of protection for forests or conservation of forest resources, germinating in these areas. So people were taking positions in these countries and in these continents to regulate it better. Some took very extreme position of absolute conservation by the state, and the state should take over all the forests and not allow any farming of timber for commercial purpose and so forth, whereas there are more pragmatists also, and there are other extremist positions being taken with respect to operationalization of commercial interests and so forth, and that we have spoken about earlier, so I wouldn't be repeating it. But this is what is happening in India under Brandes with the formation of the Forest Department in 1864. Now, coming from Germany, the country which had spearheaded forest management among the ones in Europe, he first sought to forge legal mechanisms to assert and safeguard state control over forests. So, intellectual as he was aware of the traditional ways and means by which forests were taken care of, and how callous the commercial pressures could be in terms of profligacy with which forest resources are used, are recklessly used with the introduction of railways and so forth, because he had seen it happening in Europe, and he was aware of the toll that it was taking the United States of America and so forth. So his viewpoint is shaped by this picture, and one thing that he asserts to begin with is to legally equip the forest department so as to assert the idea of conservation and safeguard state control over forests. So it is the ownership of forests which is at stake and which is being sought for. So the sheer fact that he resorts to legal means to consolidate and assert forest department's position to safeguard forests and so forth, this trajectory of change is being initiated, and this emphatic assertion of state monopoly over forest land was first attempted through the Indian Forest Act of 1865, immediately after the formation of the Forest Department. There is an emphatic assertion of state monopoly over forest land by owning it. Right, so state seeks to become the owner of existing forests. The idea is to that once the state is the owner of a particular forest, then it will be able to regulate intrusion of people into the forests and how forest resources are being used. And control it. Even the commercial intrusion is to be regulated and controlled. So it required an act, and that is what 1865 Act is all about. Indian Forest Act is all about. It was very hurriedly made. So subsequently, very, I would say, elaborate debate ensued. And subsequently, it is recast in another Forest Act. That also happens. So the realization of the strategic importance of having ownership over forest land to curtail the previously untouched access enjoyed by rural communities. So this is what Ramchandra Guha and Madhav Gadgil feel about this assertion on part of the state, that what it also meant that if the forest land is owned by the state, then the state could additionally curtail the previously untouched access that were hitherto enjoyed by the rural community. So the organic connect of the farmers and the forest people who had been using forest resources in their own traditional ways, that was also sought to be tampered with. That was also sought to be ruptured, and new legislative measures, new legal mechanisms, new do's and don'ts were created, and that also created a lot of problems in terms of forest usage. So this commercial pressure and introduction of railways, actually that pressure is being felt and is being addressed to through the talk of conservation and so forth. But as we would see subsequently in the next part of this lecture, that it continues almost unabated. And this rupturing of the organic connect of the people in the vicinity of the forests who had conservation measures or sustainable use of forest resources inbuilt into their tradition, that sense is gone. That connect, that organic connect is also ruptured. So it had its own consequences, and we shall be talking about it in the next part of this lecture. Thank you.